If you really want my forgiveness, kneel.
Everyone heard him. No one moved.
Kneel.
After the wedding, no one mentioned what happened in the church. Not in the family group chat, not over the phone, not in the polite, "How was the ceremony?" Messages that kept arriving like they did for every other wedding in Lagos that season. Photos still went up, smiling faces, white lace, a bouquet held just so, captions full of gratitude and praise. But every conversation stepped neatly around one missing frame. The moment Mama Tunde knelt on the cold stone aisle while the cathedral held its breath. It was as if the entire congregation had entered into a quiet agreement. We saw it, we heard it, and we will pretend it never happened. And yet everyone remembered. In the days that followed, the silence did not feel like peace. It felt like something pressed under a lid, something still alive. Tunde tried to move forward with the same certainty he had carried at the altar. He told himself he had done what needed to be done, that a man could not build a home on unspoken resentment, that forgiveness meant nothing if it was never earned. He repeated those sentences the way people repeat prayers when they are afraid their faith might slip. Amara did not argue with him, and that was the first thing that made him uncomfortable. On the drive home after the small post-wedding dinner, she sat in the passenger seat with her veil folded on her lap like a surrendered flag. Her face was calm, too calm, and the streetlights slid across her cheekbones as she stared out at the Lagos traffic as if watching something far away. He glanced at her twice, expecting anger, expecting tears, expecting a storm. Nothing. When they reached home, she removed her jewelry slowly, carefully, as if she did not trust her hands not to shake. "You've been quiet," he said. She nodded without looking up. "I'm tired," that was all. The next morning she made tea, asked if he wanted sugar, reminded him to call the caterer, answered relatives with a pleasant tone and a soft laugh that sounded rehearsed. Everything appeared normal, but normal was exactly what felt wrong, because when someone is truly okay, they don't have to perform it. At the first family visit after the wedding, the silence turned visible. His aunties arrived in bright asoebi, carrying bowls of jollof and trays of small chops, hugging Amara, calling her "our wife," congratulating Tunde, praising the choir and the pastor's message and the cut of his suit. No one mentioned the organ stopping. No one mentioned the microphone. No one mentioned his mother. They asked politely, "How is Mama?" as if asking about the weather. "She's fine," Tunde answered, though he did not know if it was true. He checked his phone more times than he wanted to admit, expecting a message, anger, disappointment, even a simple greeting. Nothing. When he called, it rang to voicemail, again and again. Amara noticed. That night, in the quiet of their apartment, she said, "I spoke to my mother today. She asked me how Mama Tunde was." He asked what she had said. "I said, I didn't know." The words landed softly but hard. "You didn't know?" he repeated. "I haven't seen her. She hasn't called. I don't know what she's thinking." He insisted she was fine. Amara lifted her eyes. "Is she?" She asked gently. "I understand what I saw," she added when he tried to explain. "I know she's your mother." It was not an accusation, just a fact, and somehow that made it heavier. After that, Amara became quieter in a careful way, like someone walking through a house at night, stepping lightly so they do not wake something sleeping. She listened when he spoke, smiled when he joked, but her smiles were smaller, her laughter shorter, and at night she turned slightly away from him, leaving the space between their bodies cold. Tunde told himself he was imagining it, but he began to notice how others behaved. His friend Chaik, once quick to call, was suddenly busy. Replies grew shorter. Plans were always next week. When they finally met, Chaik leaned in and muttered, "Guy, that thing for church," then stopped himself. "Forget it. It's between family." Tunde pressed him, but Chaik only shrugged. "People are talking," he said quietly. They don't want trouble. At church the following Sunday, the greetings were warm but polished. Hands were shaken, hugs exchanged. The pastor asked about married life, but eyes lingered a second too long, curious rather than kind. Tunde barely heard the sermon. He saw his mother 2 rows ahead, her deep blue gel unmistakable. Relief loosened his chest for a moment. She had come. When the service ended, she rose calmly, greeted a few women, and left through a side exit without looking back. No glance toward him, no pause. On the drive home, he told himself it didn't matter, that she was stubborn and would come around. He repeated it until it sounded almost true. But later, alone in the bathroom with the faucet running, he stared at his reflection and realized he was checking his phone the way someone checks for bad news. He had wanted control in that church. He had wanted the room to choose him, and the room had. But now the room was still choosing distance, choosing quiet, choosing to look away. He had expected noise after what he did, anger he could argue with, confrontation he could win. Instead he was getting silence, and for the first time it did not feel like victory. It felt like something waiting, something heavy and patient. And that was when Tunde began to feel uneasy. Tunde kept telling himself he was right. He repeated it in his mind like a verdict already sealed. Respect was not a luxury, it was a foundation. He told himself he had carried humiliation for years, small corrections in front of relatives, jokes that cut deeper than laughter, moments where his mother had made him feel like a boy when he was trying to stand as a man. He told himself the church was not the problem. The truth was, and the truth had finally been spoken. But the days that followed did not bring relief. They brought air that felt thick. Everywhere he went, something had shifted half an inch out of place. At work, colleagues greeted him the same way, yet their smiles lingered too long and their eyes flickered away too quickly. When his name came up in conversation, voices softened without meaning to. No one confronted him, no one accused him. They simply adjusted. That adjustment followed him into church. On Sundays, he and Amara walked in dressed like a perfect photograph, he in a tailored suit, she in elegant lace, but the warmth in the room felt rehearsed. Handshakes were firm yet cautious, nods were polite yet measured. The children waved freely, but the adults watched as if weighing something invisible. Tunde sat through sermons about humility and love, hearing beneath every hymn the echo of his own voice. Mother. Kneel. After service, Amara finally broke the quiet between them. Do you notice it? She asked as they walked toward the car. Notice what? He replied, though he knew. The way they look at you. He dismissed it, but she didn't. They're not looking at us, she said gently. They're looking at you. In the car she asked the question that had been building for days. Was it worth it? He stalled, searching for ground. Worth what? Worth humiliating her, in that place. In front of everyone. He insisted she didn't understand what had led to that moment, but when she said, "Then tell me," he found he couldn't. None of his grievances sounded large enough beside a mother on her knees. I needed respect, he finally said. Amara held his gaze. You needed respect, she repeated quietly. So you took it by force. He bristled. I didn't force her. Her answer was calm and precise. The whole church was watching. She knew that. Their life at home continued in smooth, practiced motions. Meals were cooked, bills discussed, errands planned. But the silence had changed. Before, it had been comfortable. Now it felt like a hallway neither of them wanted to walk down. Amara smiled, but her smiles ended quickly. She kissed him goodnight, but her body shifted slightly away in sleep, leaving a space between them that felt deliberate. Tunde tried to reclaim control by reaching out to his mother. He called. Voicemail. He sent messages. No reply. Days stretched into weeks. He had expected anger, confrontation, noise, something he could argue with. Instead, he received absence. News of his mother came indirectly. An aunt mentioned seeing her at the market, greeting neighbors as usual. A cousin said she attended a church meeting and laughed at a joke. She was fine, they said. She was normal. But she did not mention him. That omission felt more cutting than any public rebuke. At night he scrolled through wedding photos that looked flawless, studying his own confident posture, searching for the crack he now felt spreading beneath it. Amara would lie beside him, back turned, and the distance between them felt wider than the mattress. One evening he found her sitting in the dim living room, hands folded in her lap. "My mother asked if your mother has forgiven you yet," she said softly. "And what did you say?" he asked. "I said I don't think forgiveness is the question anymore." He felt a chill. "Then what is?" Amara met his eyes. "I think she's done trying to reach you. And I think she's letting you feel what it's like to not be reached." He had no answer for that. Alone in front of the mirror later, he tried to summon anger, to frame the silence as manipulation, but it did not feel like strategy. It felt like withdrawal. There were no shouting matches, no dramatic scenes, no public confrontations. Just a widening space between what had once been close between mother and son, husband and wife, certainty and doubt. Only distance, quiet and steady, growing a little more each day. The truth began to surface slowly, not through a dramatic confrontation or a stormy midnight confession, but like loose papers slipping from an old file one page at a time, forcing Tunde to finally read what he had ignored for years. It started with a call from his uncle Adwale, whose voice carried a weight that made Tunde straighten before he even understood why. "Do you know what your mother did that year?" his uncle asked. That year, the year his business collapsed, the year creditors called relentlessly, the year he signed documents too quickly and borrowed more than he could afford to repay. Back then, he had only told his mother part of the story, just enough to hint at trouble, but not enough to reveal how close he was to losing everything. He had hidden the worst details from Amara, still only his girlfriend at the time, because he could not bear the thought of her seeing him as weak. "She sold the land in Abeju-Lekki," his uncle said quietly. "The last piece your father left." Tunde went still. He remembered that land clearly, a modest but valuable plot his mother had guarded for years as a quiet promise of stability. She had spoken about building something there one day, a house for family gatherings, a symbol that their name would endure. He also remembered the day the pressure from creditors mysteriously eased. The threatening calls stopped, and the numbers somehow balanced themselves. He had told himself it was because he negotiated well, because he worked hard, because God intervened. He had never asked how it happened. Now he understood. She sold the land for him and said nothing. The second part of the truth came through Amara, who handed him a worn folder Aunt Funk had given her. Inside was a copy of his old loan agreement, and beneath his signature was another name written in careful, slightly trembling script, Mama Tunde. She had signed as guarantor, meaning if he defaulted, they would have taken her property. He remembered overhearing her firm voice on the phone during those months, telling someone the matter would be resolved. At the time he believed she was interfering, embarrassing him, making him look incapable. But now another interpretation stood before him. She had been shielding him. He thought back to a family gathering that year when an uncle casually asked about the business. He had frozen, unsure what to say, and his mother had stepped in, smiling tightly, saying he was restructuring and that young men needed time. He had burned with humiliation, convinced she was exposing weakness. Now he replayed the scene differently. Perhaps she had known the danger he was in and had stepped in to protect him from questions that might unravel everything. He remembered other moments too, when she warned him about signing documents too quickly or urged him to slow down. He had interpreted her caution as control and disrespect, proof she refused to see him as a grown man. But perhaps she had seen the cliff he was approaching and had not known how else to pull him back. The narrative he had carried for years began to fracture. He had convinced himself his mother was the source of his shame, that she made him small in front of others and owed him an apology. Yet what if the shame he felt was not humiliation imposed on him, but pride resisting correction? Amara's voice was steady when she said, "You always said she embarrassed you, but maybe she was trying to stop you from being truly embarrassed. The words lodged deep inside him. The church incident suddenly shifted in his memory. What he believed was reclaiming dignity might have been an explosion built on misunderstanding. If the foundation of his anger was flawed, what exactly had he been defending? The more he examined it, the clearer it became. His mother had carried his debt quietly, risked her last property, signed her name beneath his, defended him publicly when she could have exposed him, and allowed him to believe he survived on his own. Sitting alone in the dim room with the ceiling fan turning overhead, Tunde felt something heavy settle in his chest. Not insult, not anger, but recognition. Recognition that the story he had told himself, carefully shaped and repeated, might have been incomplete. The church moment was no longer simply about an apology. It was about years of misinterpretation, a son mistaking protection for control, and pride growing unchecked until it demanded validation in front of an entire congregation. The story was no longer simple. It was misunderstanding and an ego that had been fed for far too long. One day, Tunde went to his mother's house. He told himself it was for closure, that a man could not let silence stretch this long between himself and his own mother. In the car, he rehearsed calm, measured sentences, imagining he would walk in, speak clearly, and restore order to something that had drifted beyond his control. But as he drove through the familiar streets of her neighborhood, the roadside stalls, the hum of generators, the women selling tomatoes under bright umbrellas, his confidence began to thin. Life moved normally, indifferently, as if nothing had happened, and that indifference unsettled him. The house looked exactly the same. The metal gate with chipped paint, the mango tree leaning over the compound wall, the courtyard swept clean. It should have comforted him, but instead it felt staged, like a photograph of a place no longer inhabited. He knocked once, then twice, then called softly, "Mama." No answer. He pushed the gate. It opened too easily. Inside, the courtyard was tidy, the plastic chairs stacked neatly against the wall, the mat by the door rolled up. The stillness felt deliberate. He called again, louder this time, but the only reply was the faint echo of his own voice. The door to the house opened under his hand. Inside, everything remained in its proper place, yet something essential was missing. The curtains were drawn. The sofa was covered with cloth. Several smaller framed photos were gone, leaving pale outlines on the wall. The familiar scent of her cooking had vanished, replaced by a neutral emptiness. He checked the bedroom. The bed was tightly made, but the wardrobe was half empty, the jewelry box gone. The room reflected back at him like a life carefully folded away. She was not there. When he stepped back into the courtyard, a neighbor stood near the gate, watching him with quiet understanding. "She has gone," the woman said gently when he asked where his mother was. "Just for some time." She said she needed peace. The word peace landed heavily. He asked why she hadn't told him. The neighbor lowered her eyes briefly. "She didn't want noise," she said. "She doesn't like noise." The word noise echoed inside him. He had created noise in the church public, deliberate noise. His mother had answered him with absence. The neighbor gestured toward a small table near the entrance. She left something. On the table lay a folded piece of paper beside a Bible. The handwriting was unmistakable, careful, steady. He unfolded it and found only 3 words. "I still love you." No anger. No explanation. No reminder of sacrifices. No accusation. Just love, offered without condition. He had prepared for confrontation, for raised voices, for a defense he could challenge. Instead, she had removed herself from the argument entirely. He sat on the edge of the sofa holding the note, the house pressing in with its quiet order. Anger would have been easier. A harsh word, a curse, even a public rebuke would have allowed him to stand his ground and defend himself. But this silence, this refusal to retaliate, stripped him of any position he could fight from. She had not punished him. She had protected herself. She had chosen dignity without revenge. And that quiet choice pierced deeper than any scolding ever could. No bitterness, no blame, no accusation, only love left behind in careful handwriting. That hurt him more than any rebuke ever would. In the eyes of the crowd that day, he had won. He had stood at the altar, held the microphone, and made the entire cathedral bend to his will. No one challenged him. No one intervened. Even the hesitation in the priest's eyes had felt like permission. When his mother knelt, the moment sealed itself into memory as proof of control. For a brief time, he clung to that feeling, convincing himself it had been necessary, that a man who cannot demand respect in his own family cannot expect it anywhere else. He told himself the silence in the church meant agreement, that he had finally drawn a line that needed to be drawn. But time does not preserve victories the way pride does. It stretches them out until their cost becomes visible. The first thing he lost was not his mother, it was ease. Amara changed in ways so quiet that no outsider would notice, but he felt each shift. He still cooked, still asked if he wanted tea, still wore her wedding ring, but the unthinking gestures of affection disappeared. The hand on his shoulder as she passed behind him, the way she leaned into him on the couch, the instinctive closeness in bed, those vanished. At night she lay with her back turned, not in anger, not dramatically, just in distance. When he tried to pull her closer, she allowed it, but her body felt guarded, like she was measuring the space between them. One evening he accused her gently of judging him. She replied calmly, "I'm not judging. I'm learning." The word unsettled him more than anger would have, because it meant she was reassessing who he was. The church shifted too. There was no formal reprimand, no public rebuke, just absence. Before the wedding he had been invited to read scripture, to assist with youth programs, to sit among elders in discussions that mattered. Afterward, the invitations quietly stopped. Sundays passed when he expected to go forward, and was not. Meetings occurred without his knowledge. The pastor still greeted him warmly, but the warmth ended quickly. A deacon once placed a hand on his shoulder and said gently, "Focus on your home." It sounded like advice, but it felt like exile. The congregation still watched him, but no longer with curiosity, now with caution. The quiet understanding that this was what he was capable of. He had wanted respect. What he received was distance wrapped in politeness. Family gatherings changed in subtler ways. The food was still abundant, the greetings still loud, but something essential was missing. His mother's absence sat in every room like an empty chair no one mentioned. Without her laughter, her instructions to the children, her steady presence anchoring conversations, the gatherings felt thinner. Relatives greeted him kindly, but conversations skimmed the surface and moved on. Once, a cousin pulled him aside and said quietly, "Go and beg her properly." Tunde insisted he had tried. The cousin shook his head, not like a man who wants to win. Like a son who knows he's wrong. The words stayed with him longer than he wanted to admit. At home, Amara received calls from relatives asking if she was okay. When she told him his mother would not attend Christmas, the news settled heavily in the room. "She asked if I'm okay," Amara said. "And what did you say?" He asked. "I said I don't know." The same answer she had given before. "I don't know." It echoed in the quiet apartment like something closing. Tunde began to feel the weight of what he had exchanged. He had believed he was reclaiming dignity, but dignity taken by force does not hold warmth. He had traded belonging for obedience, intimacy for control. In the cathedral that day, he had felt powerful. Weeks later, he felt hollow. Amara no longer looked at him with the same trust. The church no longer called his name when significance was at stake. Family still gathered, but the warmth did not linger. His mother's absence was not loud or dramatic. It was steady and firm, a boundary no one could cross for him. Tunde wanted respect. What he received instead was distance measured, persistent, and growing. And beneath that distance lay something even heavier, prolonged silence.